And joining us on the program now is Chief Executive of Age Concern, Karen Billings-Jensen. Karen, kia ora, thank you for your time today.
Good morning.
Now, when it comes to contracts like this, I mean, it's a big decision for anybody to make. Devil's in the detail, perhaps. There's a lot of fine print for people to go through. If somebody is considering looking at moving into a retirement village, firstly, I suppose it would pay to check that fine print and perhaps get some advice from someone else?
Very much so, and that's a key part of the process. So when you're given the ORA, your Occupational Rights Agreement, you are meant to seek legal advice with it. But one of the big things that the whole sector has been working for is really the review of the Retirement Village Act, because what we would like to see and many is just plain and accessible language.
Yep. So
that actually when people do sign a contract, it's really clear what's in it, what's covered. This issue that particularly came up from Consumer in the Retirement Villages Residents Association about chattels and fixtures.
Mm-hmm.
We just think, again, if it's clearly identified, then that will remove some of what you identified and what I call the tetchy bits.
Yeah.
For most people, the difficult parts are the getting in, the getting out, and if there's any little tetchiness in the middle. But what we know is that many people absolutely are very happy with where they're living and the environment they're living in. And there are great practice from many of the providers.
And certainly I know there'll be many people, even people listening to this at the moment, who've had positive experiences in that regard. I suppose the question is it fair, and do people know what they're signing up for? You mentioned the review that has happened recently and Consumer NZ involved with this. Let's start with the getting in, I suppose. Being able to compare one place with another, knowing what you're paying for, what you're not paying for. I suppose these are legal contracts, but you shouldn't have to engage a lawyer in order to be able to understand what you're signing up for.
Yes, remember it is a really, really large investment for most people. Those, the 14 or 15% of the over 75s that are in retirement villages, it is a really important housing choice for older people across the whole housing market. But when you're making such a large investment, you need to make sure that you've got the right advice.
Yep.
So ensuring for us that the contracts, as I said, are plain and accessible language that people can understand it. As I said, mainly for when something might go wrong.
One of the other sticking points, I suppose, is maintenance costs. And there's questions about, look, if somebody's moving into a unit and they're not actually owning the unit physically and yet they're paying for maintenance costs, that looks a little bit like double dipping, doesn't it?
Well, it just provides that challenge. And again, what we know is that how those occupational rights agreements set out, it's really having that clarity around which are the operator, so the provider, what are their own chattels and fixtures. And I think this is where, as Consumer and the Retirement Villages Residents Association have raised, is that there's just some real challenge around, again, compliance with the Fair Trading Act. We'd also maybe think around the rights for renters in terms of the Residential Tenancies Act and its amendments around, if you don't own it, what's your responsibility? I mean, we do think that obviously there needs to be reasonable, if it's intentional or reckless damage, then that's a little bit different from wear and tear. And particularly maybe if you've gone into a unit or an apartment, what the previous user had with wear and tear. So again, it's having that clarity around where the responsibility lies. And it sits within that whole review of the Retirement Villages Act.
And I suppose, to put it in simple terms, is the resident a tenant or an owner in that regard? Because I think we all understand there's different responsibilities depending on what side of the line they're sitting in that regard. One of the other sticking points is capital gains. If there's capital gains on the property, where does that go? It seems that particularly with some contracts, that if there's any capital gains, it goes to the retirement village rather than the resident, regardless of how long they've been there. I suppose it's a very difficult thing to measure if it's a unit within a larger complex. Just I suppose, where that capital gains sits, and it would be difficult to make it proportional.
Yeah, it's definitely been a real problematic thing around the sector. But of course, again, as providers remind us that if there's a capital loss, that the resident doesn't bear that as well. But that's really what the deferred fee is all around. So it is definitely a model that works, as I said, for a percentage of New Zealanders. And they go into that, and that's part of understanding, getting that legal advice as part of the contract at the beginning. But what we know is that housing and housing stock is really changing. The nature of home ownership is changing. So there'll be fewer people that actually own their own home in the future. And largely you can get into a retirement village by selling your own home.
Yeah, and I suppose I take the point that they bear the cost of capital loss, although I'm not sure when the last time that happened.
That's right.
Within the New Zealand housing
it's
market.
Not a particularly strong argument,
in theory, but in actual fact, one of the final things, I suppose, is if when we come to the end of our life, a resident passes away, how quickly that's turned around. And I know that there are some fishhooks in contracts which say, oh yes, we will only pass the money on to you once we've resold the unit, and if we need to repaint and recarpet, and some places do this as standard, they will pass the costs of renovating the unit onto the estate or the family. There's some fishhooks in the out clauses.
Absolutely. As I said, it's the getting in, getting out, and occasional tetchy bits in the middle. But that's what the review of the Retirement Village Act, and that's why most people kind of involved in the sector are really keen to see that review completed by government and actually the changes made. We know that voluntarily there has been movement from a lot of the providers around that, but some of the big things are, when is the funds released? We know, again, some operators are really, as I said, have best practice and are responding to releasing the money back to an estate in a timely manner, or if someone's needing to go into a different form of care. But this is absolutely the kind of things that need to be looked at, which is why us and Retirement Villages, Resident Association, Consumer, a whole lot of agencies are really pushing the government on this. They've done the review. Now it's what happens next, because these things like the chattels, like the fixtures, like the getting out stuff, all needs to be sorted.
Now, of course, this is a competitive industry. There would, of course, be an opportunity for a retirement village or a business which perhaps own the chain of retirement villages to say how our terms and conditions are better than the other guy, in order to be able to attract perhaps a business and get a gold star review in that regard. Given that it's a competitive industry, wouldn't it be great to have the retirement villages competing against each other as to who can offer the best deal?
I guess obviously that's how business operates, but we also just want to make sure that there are some basic things that are the same, and so one of the conversations has been around that standard occupational rights, so that actually you can compare apples with apples. Because it's a big decision, and it might be coming at a time when there is a bit of pressure to move. And so actually let's make it as simple and as transparent as we can to support people at what's one of the biggest decisions that they'll make around their assets. And as I said, they can be making it at a time where there is a lot of external or health pressures that are making this happen. And again, now we know that the housing market is a bit depressed. And so that's actually challenging the amount of money that people have to then be able to purchase into a retirement village. So it's a bit of a interesting time at the moment because of the influence of the housing market.
And I mean, as you were indicating beforehand, of course, not everybody is going to have the capacity to look at being able to be in a retirement village, especially if they're not mortgage-free homeowners at the point of their retirement. And demand for these types of facilities are only going to go up in the years ahead. So perhaps now a good opportunity for people to assess what's available to get some of these details right. Just finally on this, Karen, if somebody is in that situation where they are considering taking that step of moving into retirement community, or perhaps affecting somebody in their family, what advice would you give in terms of the advice that they should get? What would be the first step, in your opinion, Karen?
I think it is actually visiting a number of places if you've got the capacity to do so, and looking at what is in the occupational rights agreement and being able to compare that. So at the moment, that really does probably require, with some of the wording, that legal advice.
Okay.
So really, it is a big step. Seek advice, talk to people if you can who live in a place to find out whether it is the right environment for you.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's really, and if you're supporting an older family member, then actually, yeah, everybody can do their homework, and it's a really upfront conversation, and people know what they're in for, what they're signing up for. And then they are able to move to a place that they would like to live in, that they can afford to live in, and enjoy living there, which we know many people do.
Karen, thank you so much for the work that you do at Age Concern. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today. ageconcern.org.nz for more information. Kia ora, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.